Hello, Whitefish. The deadline is quickly approaching for the city of Whitefish to finalize its state-mandated update to its growth policy, a blueprint that will shape how our community grows over the next 20 years. Under the Montana Land Use Planning Act, Whitefish must complete this update by May of this year. Everything from housing and land use to transportation, economic development, and how we protect our natural resources are all at stake. Right now, the Planning Commission and City Council have been working through draft chapters of what's being called Vision Whitefish 2045, trying to find common ground on what our future looks like. But it has not been smooth. There have been real differences of opinion, especially around housing affordability, density, and mixed-use development. Some of the debate has centered on whether Whitefish should encourage more walkable, affordable neighborhoods with a mix of housing and commerce, or continue to lean into low-density suburban-style growth that favors longtime landowners. The planning group has emphasized that this growth policy will influence zoning decisions and infrastructure investment for decades. That means our voices matter more than ever, and the folks involved from both sides are urging more community engagement as the process races towards the finish line. Today's guest, to help us break all of this down, is Keegan Siebanaler, Executive Director of Shelter WF, a local affordable housing advocacy nonprofit born out of the Flathead Valley that works to expand housing opportunities and keep our community livable for residents of all incomes. Keegan grew up here, studied environmental engineering and energy at the University of Notre Dame, and came back home to help address the very zoning, land use, and housing issues we're talking about today. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. If you would like to help support the fight against human trafficking, visit thriverscoffee.com to order your coffee and make a difference today. Go Pills are a blend of 8 nootropic neurochargers that support focus, clarity, attention, fast recall, and decision-making. These have actually been tested by some of the U.S. military's top special operators who have given rave reviews to Go Pills. You can get 15% off your order when you use the code HELLO15 at checkout when you visit gopills.com. Dude, Keegan, thanks for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
I think you've had a really awesome impact as far as just kind of getting the word out about what's been happening with the city.
Yeah.
What's really just going on with the culture of construction and how the city is growing. It's definitely sparked a lot of conversation that people are talking about around town because of your videos, which is awesome. So can you kind of tell us first, what is Shelter Whitefish?
Yeah. So Shelter WF, often called Shelter Whitefish, fine with either. We formed in 2022. And so what we do is we focus on housing and land use policy in Whitefish, in the Flathead Valley more broadly, and then at the state level. So we formed after Mountain Gateway, which was a project up near the mountain, was denied. And what we saw is that in a lot of those community meetings surrounding that project, there was really only one type of person that showed up and that their voice was heard. And it was people who had already lived in Whitefish for a long time, had already, kind of made it. They owned land. And the people that project might have benefited, the renters, the people that work at the downtown restaurants, things like that, they didn't even live in Whitefish. They didn't know about the project. And so the benefits weren't really seen. Those people didn't have a voice. So that's what Shelter WF started out as. It started out of, anger over kind of who gets power in housing discussions in Whitefish. And, it really grew quickly from there. So we started doing state level work in the 2023 legislative session, and we hired on me. I've been on the board since the beginning, but I've been the executive director for 2 or 3 months, and it's been really fun to be able to have these conversations with you and really with anyone in Whitefish. It's such a tremendous place to live. I grew up in the Flathead Valley, and I just want people in my generation to be able to experience that as well. And keep this valley as a place where locals can live, as a working class community. I think that's incredibly important. And it also just does require quite a bit of policy change and maybe a shift in sort of how we think about how our cities develop. So that's what I'm passionate about. That's kind of how we see our impact.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Shelter WF has been pretty involved at the state level. Can you talk about some of the legislation that you guys have been involved in?
Yeah, so Shelter WF is a YIMBY organization. So that stands
What is YIMBY?
Yeah, it stands for Yes in My Backyard. And it's in response to like this term NIMBY, not in my backyard, which is the kind of pejorative term for someone that doesn't want to see kind of new housing near them. And that dynamic has played out kind of for decades under the regime of zoning, which I'm sure we'll get into. And in San Francisco, which obviously has like one of the worst housing crises in the country, in about 2010, 2015, there was a movement of basically saying, hey, the big problem in San Francisco isn't that there's some big buildings downtown. It's that in over 85% of the city, you can't build anything more than 2 stories high, right? Or more than 2 separate units in it, which is crazy for a city like San Francisco. So the YIMBY movement grew out of there and then kind of exploded across the U.S. And so we kind of brought it to Montana for the first time. So the bills we passed in the 2023 state legislature that we were kind of instrumental in creating, there were 5 of them. So the most important were SB 245, which allows kind of mid-rise residential in any sort of previously commercial-only zone. That's the project we went and saw on Baker Avenue, as well as SB 382. And that's the Montana Land Use Planning Act. That's why Whitefish is doing a growth policy right now. In many ways, that's why I have a job, which is kind of cool. Our chicken's coming home to roost.
Nice.
That requires that any city over, I think, 6,000 residents has to plan for growth for the next 20 years. So they have to do a housing assessment. They have to see how many people they expect to move in. And then they have to zone for that much new housing to be built. So I don't think that bill is perfect, but I think it at least gets us all on the same terms, which is the idea that by considering that growth is going to happen in Montana, like it will, this place is super desirable, it's an awesome place to live, then we can better come like to a decision as a community as to how that growth will take place, as opposed to just kind of burying our head in the sand and allowing growth to kind of take over in ways we don't like and not planning for it at all because we just hate, because the word itself is a curse word in Montana.
The growth policy, the first meetings I remember going to, was it last fall when we
Maybe
first
2 falls ago.
Two falls ago.
It's been a process, yeah.
To kind of explain the process,
Yeah.
and to kind of try to get people excited to participate.
Totally.
Which it seemed like, a huge amount of people showed up for that first meeting.
Yeah.
How has it progressed, and kind of where are we at with that policy, and what's going on with the growth policy?
Yeah. So the growth policy has to be complete by May.
So it's coming up.
Otherwise, the city will be out of compliance with the state law,
Okay.
and they can be sued. So stuff has to happen quickly. I think the very idea of the growth policy is good. What we've done in the past is individual developments have come up and people have gotten pissed about them. And in most cases, they've gotten denied, at least for kind of dense developments that would create more affordable housing. Suburbs, we approve by right. There's really not many chances for community input. We're really good at building suburbs. But in terms of housing that we see as more useful to kind of the scale of the housing crisis here in the Flathead, they kind of come piecemeal as a big project, and then people register their complaints with kind of everything they want to, kind of focused onto this one development. So I think the idea of planning ahead of time and talking about where we want development to happen and where we don't is a good idea. I just think it's still subject to some of the same constraints that we see as kind of more endemic to the housing system. If you have a community meeting on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. and it goes for 4 hours, like what kind of people are going to show up? Is it going to be people that are working at the restaurants that night? Is it going to be people with kids? Or is it going to be like a lot of older, wealthier homeowners? And that's what we see in Whitefish. That's what we see all around the country. And so I think it's a big challenge to the city staff, to whatever consultants we hire, to kind of really value everyone's community input equally. The biggest challenge we've seen in the growth policy process so far is that there've been pretty good drafts that have came out of the city, and then they go to the Planning Commission, and I have a lot of complaints with how the Planning Commission is valuing community feedback. I remember I went to one session where we were discussing the economic development chapter. So, a lot of different people have particular interests in whitefish, and we had a public comment period at the start of the meeting. Everyone was able to give their comment. Then they closed public comment, and then during the meeting, they would have a question about something in the growth policy, and they would ask a particular member of the audience to comment over and over. As all of us stood there and we're like, "Wait, public comment is closed, right?" So I think it's funny when you go to those original sessions and everyone was excited to participate. And I think it's really sad when the public input process isn't treated equally, that everyone's input isn't treated equally, because it made all of us sitting there say, okay, well, why are we here if our public input isn't really valued in the same way? So all the chapters of the growth policy are written by city staff. They go to the Planning Commission, and then they go to City Council for approval. So the Planning Commission has a massive ability to shape what these drafts of the next 20 years of whitefish look like. And so I think it's really important that we pressure them to do the best job and to represent everybody equally. So that's been some of the work I've done with different reels and stuff like that. There's going to be 3 open seats on the Planning Commission in January. Those are appointed by City Council. I think hopefully they'll recognize that kind of the current setup of the Planning Commission hasn't been very functional. So we'll see.
What are the qualifications for those positions? What does the council look for?
Basically, they say development experience in some sense. So 2 of those seats will be within city limits, and then 1 will be from the county as well.
Okay.
I think it's also an important thing about the Flathead Valley. We talk like we're in silos: Whitefish, Kalispell, Sioux Falls. People are driving every day between the cities to go to work, and there's a lot that can happen when the cities work together and think about their little silos in terms of the larger housing situation in the Flathead Valley. I think what we see as a big problem is Whitefish doesn't want to build housing. And they say, okay, Kalispell and Sioux Falls will build it. I don't think that's fair to anybody. I don't think it's fair to people who want to live in Whitefish that work here. I don't think it's fair to those other cities that have to absorb all of that growth to an unequal degree. A lot of that goes to Kalispell, right? That's becoming the working class community as Whitefish and Columbia Falls have become more exclusive.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's true. I mean, I was in Kalispell and just seeing how much is being developed north of Kalispell. I mean, this whole area is just kind of we'll talk about sprawl and what that means, and it's feeding a need. But that building housing in Whitefish has changed a lot. Yeah. Over the years, like going from the 80s to the 90s to 2000s, right at a point now where maybe you can speak to this. We're seeing a lot of like townhouse type apartment buildings being built, like by Smith Fields. There's a lot of development there.
Totally.
Why are we seeing more of those type buildings versus like in the neighborhoods where we're seeing houses being built? Yeah. I mean, I know there's like, this is good because we need more building, but there's like a specific way there's like restrictions on how things can be built, which is kind of turning into these cookie cutter spots being turned up. And I'm curious also, second question, the new development across from the town pump outside of town.
Yeah.
I'm interested to talk about that one too.
For sure. Okay. So we like all of this is zoning. When I talk about zoning, I talk about not simply like the zoning code, but the entire series of covenants and rules that municipalities put on what can be built where. The core of that is like a zoning code, which says this is a single family residential area. This is a commercial zone. This is a 2-family residential area. And unless your use is explicitly permitted under that zoning code, then you need approval from the city to build there, from the city council. Because of zoning, which is kind of the way that the American West has developed, in contrary to almost any other place around the globe, we separate uses. So you live here, you work here, you recreate here, you shop here, you go to dinner here. And what that means is that we create little silos where we have a standard of what the place can look like and nothing else can exist. So what that results in is developments that seem out of place with their surrounding environment. So the way that cities develop almost any other place, I love talking about this because I grew up in the Flathead. And when I grew up here, I just kind of thought cities everywhere looked like this. You don't know anything different. It's like, why would you? And then, you visit Europe, or you watch some videos, or you go to anywhere else, or you read a book and you realize, oh, this is entirely a series of policy choices that we've made. And it's worth questioning whether those policy choices are actually serving a lot of people. So when it comes to whitefish, the types of developments that are the most affordable or that are in short supply are these denser developments, townhomes, apartments, condos, stuff like that. So why are they more affordable? There's a little bit of stuff around construction cost that makes them more affordable. When you share walls, when you share heating and cooling, you can get some efficiencies in the construction process. Honestly, those are pretty minor. They're significant, but they're not going to be the biggest factor. The main reason why housing is expensive in whitefish is because land is expensive. And that's because it's in high demand, right? We talk about real estate, like location, location, location. When the price of each square foot of land is high, when you can build more units on each square foot, then you can drive down the overall cost for each particular unit. So we see a massive lack of supply of those types of units. And because of that, we're just bidding against each other. And a lot of times the people that can't participate in that market are the workers, are the locals, right? Are people like me who want to be able to move back to the Flathead and build a life here, and also can't really have as much opportunity. So you mentioned the development out on 93 and 40. Shelter WF spoke in support of that project because, I think we're in a pretty dire situation in whitefish. So a stat I bring up all the time, I feel like it just lives rent-free in my head, no pun intended, is that over 60% of people who work in whitefish can't live within the zip code. So Columbia Falls, Kalispell, Kyla, Olney, right?
Yeah, totally.
I know someone, I met someone who works at Starbucks that lives in Eureka.
Whoa.
Right? Crazy. And so because of that, we thought that project would be net beneficial for the people that can live there and work in whitefish instead of working in Kalispell, right? That's an environmental benefit as well.
Totally.
Less driving.
Yep.
At the same time, I can see why so many people look at a development where you cut down a bunch of trees on the edge of town and build an apartment building and say, that looks way out of place. And it does, but that's the only place you can get approval to build an apartment building, because if you want to build it closer to town where it makes more sense, then you do have NIMBYs, right? You have neighbors who have a lot of power and they can block that project. So what zoning fundamentally does, what it's always done, is it segregates a place economically. We have a wrong side of the tracks here in whitefish, right? A lot of the development happens on the north side of town as opposed to in the avenues. And that's not a bug of zoning or land use policy. That's a feature. That's what it's designed to do. Cities naturally sort of rise in density and walkability and kind of livability towards a central core. In whitefish, that's the downtown core. And when we don't allow that to happen, when we don't allow cities to naturally kind of redevelop, it leads to projects out on the edge of town that look way out of place. So we've kind of made our bed, and we're lying in it. You brought up the idea of North Kalispell, right? Whitefish is spreading south. Kalispell is spreading north. They're both, the triangle, right? You got the triangle cities. They're all spreading towards each other. The size of the valley is about the same size as Salt Lake City. Have you been to Salt Lake recently?
No, not recently.
It's all suburbs, right? Like there's Ogden up north. There's Salt Lake City. There's wherever University of Utah is down south. And those used to be completely separate cities the way that we have. And then as growth happened, as sprawl happened, as zoning kind of dictated the way those cities grew, they all grew towards each other. And now you can go 25 miles along it and just see pavement and asphalt. That's exactly what you're going to see here. Like whitefish can grow. We're not bounded by mountains on every side, and it will. And I think when I think about our cities, I think on a 50-year time frame. What is the valley going to look like in 50 years? If it's our current form of development, I can only see more and more parking lots and sprawl and stroads kind of encroaching closer and closer and closer until it's one big city. I don't think anyone in the valley wants that. That's why I feel so motivated to talk to people like you and to get the word out about the fact that we are limiting how livable our cities can be through like a regulatory scheme that it values cars above people. It values sprawl above density, and it values the economic assets of existing homeowners above affordability.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot there.
There is, but that's all important points.
Yeah.
The thing about the Highway 40 thing, it's like, they didn't really cut down that many trees in the grand scheme of how many.
It was
trees
a Hong Kong Harry's, right?
Yeah, it was Hong Kong Harry's. It was an open lot. It was like a few political banners. Now here,
can I say I love Hong Kong Harry's?
Oh, totally. Me too.
Yeah.
Hong Kong Harry's is great. I've been shopping there since I was like 5. The guy that is developing that behind it, I have a friend of mine who's done a lot of work for him and has nothing but great things to say about him.
Totally.
He's like if I understand, he's like an LA developer that has actually built some super cool buildings, and his architectural style is cool. I'm sure he's bound to the zoning laws.
Yeah.
But when I looked into him, I was like, this guy's actually built some super cool stuff.
I like the overall, I like the project.
Is there going to be commercial stuff in there? Did I see?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there might be.
Yeah.
Again, I love that idea of bringing where people work closer to where they live.
And it's just a big empty field. So I feel like it's like, thank goodness that actually is finally being developed into something productive.
I think South Whitefish has a lot of potential.
Totally.
I just think when places develop around the car, it requires a lot of reimagining of what you can do with it. Downtown Whitefish developed before zoning. And a lot of it wouldn't be allowed under the current zoning regime, which is funny. The parts of Whitefish that people love could never be built today.
Yeah.
Which is a really fascinating thing to think about. I think like a lot of those smaller homes in the avenues too, like when we talk about density, what we don't mean is Manhattan.
Right.
What we mean is duplexes and ADUs and little cottage courts and stuff like that can serve more people and exist right next to a single family home that someone has lived in for 30 years. It's not mutually exclusive. It's not about eliminating anyone's choice. It's giving people more options that as a side benefit, I think can really help our community and the environment and the economy. So
totally.
I think like Montana in the past 5 or 10 years has become a very zero-sum mindset. Part of that comes out of COVID. It's I get mine, and if you get yours, that means that I'm being screwed somewhere down the way. I don't believe in that. I went to school out in the Midwest in like a classic Rust Belt city. So I was in South Bend, Indiana. And that city has lost a lot of population over the past like 40 years. And I was there when Pete Buttigieg was mayor, and he was doing a lot of work trying to revitalize that downtown. But like the Studebaker plant left in the 70s, and there's all this infrastructure, and like homes are falling down because there's no value in them. And it would be so funny. I'd go out there and kind of be enmeshed in that community and kind of their problems. It was dying, right? The entire city was dying. And I think about how anyone there would die to have the problems that we had here, right? We're complaining about growth, and I get it. Like, yeah, it's worth considering. And at the same time, it's like, it is such a massive opportunity. It's like such a massive gift to have what we have in the Flathead. I think that's always what I come back to, is just like, this is a great place. I love sharing it with others. And I want to be here the rest of my life. And we gotta do the work to make that a reality for a lot of people.
Right.
But I think it's fundamentally a positive vision. It's like, this can be good for everybody. It just requires us asking some hard questions about whether the existing regulatory scheme serves most people.
What's your ideal situation then? Like, what are some solutions to these big questions?
Fundamentally, I think the city needs to try to do less. The reason zoning fails to create affordable housing, the reason it leads to so much argumentation, the reason it divides people is because for zoning to work, it needs to perfectly determine exactly how everyone's going to live, and that's never going to change. And so, maybe the housing system in the Flathead was working okay in 2019. I think there were some structural flaws, but maybe it was working well enough for a decent amount of people. And then COVID hits, a lot of people work remotely, and a lot more money comes into the valley in a way they weren't prepared for. And zoning just has no flexibility to respond to shocks like that. And these happen all the time. It's like, try to aggregate everybody's preferences that lives in the Flathead and how those change over time. A 200-page set of rules in city code is never going to be able to manage all of that. So in my opinion, I think cities need to be a lot more humble about what they can control. I think they need to focus on transportation. I think they need to focus on building out infrastructure to allow for stuff to develop. And beyond that, I think they need to allow the aggregate preferences of people as expressed through the market to build the type of housing and amenities that people want. Now, once you do that, once you get rid of this massive lack of supply that I think is the fundamental problem, what's causing the crisis, then the effectiveness of kind of government intervention in the forms of, some other great organizations that we have in Whitefish, like Housing Whitefish and the Whitefish Housing Authority, that are more focused on helping people who kind of will never be able to afford a market rate unit. That's where those can go a lot further. Whitefish does a really good job of having a lot of money and philanthropy and stuff like that. And all of that money and philanthropy has not sort of solved the underlying issue. That money goes a lot further when it works in tandem with some of the kind of abundance policies that we support. So that's the more philosophical question.
Yeah.
In terms of specific policies, we think that getting rid of things like parking minimums, getting rid of setback or height restrictions or limiting those to some extent, and kind of looking at other ways, stuff like the Architectural Review Committee, where we just add a lot of time and energy from developers for, in my opinion, pretty useless benefits to the way that the city looks in the end. I think taking a hard look at those questions is really useful. Another thing that I think a lot of people in Whitefish support, as expressed through a decent amount of the visioning sessions for the land use policy, is making Whitefish multimodal, so allowing people to walk or bike places in addition to driving. And Whitefish has one of the best bike networks in the Flathead. We've got Whitefish Trails, which I'll go on and on about as being just phenomenal. Love Whitefish Trail System, shout out.
Yeah.
And great sidewalks downtown, a great walkable downtown core. And I think doubling down on that, allowing more of that mixed use, where you can have a coffee shop on your corner, even if your neighborhood's by Smithfields or something, that can really be a force multiplier for a lot of these policies as well.
Do you think the zoning, some of these regulations from whether if it's zoning or the Architectural Review Board, inhibits creativity from the design aspect of maybe some cool buildings? How do we see more of that? How do we encourage people to be more creative so that our town doesn't turn into something more generic?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's not like Montanans are just inherently less creative than some other place. You were talking about Nova Scotia earlier as having all these really colorful homes. If individual people want to have a house made out of gray paneling, good for you, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't think that should be codified into law. I think you should be able to paint your house whatever color you want. I think that's what adds a lot of life to a city. Back when I lived on the north side of the viaduct, I'd walk by a home that had the classic rusted out truck in the front yard and 10 weather vanes, and I loved it.
Totally. There's still a couple out there.
It was great. It's wow, somebody lives here.
Yeah,
you know. Cities are kind of inherently very creative places.
Yep.
Especially small towns, especially small mountain towns, right? Whitefish, I think, is a weirder place than driving around it you would think it is.
Oh, totally.
You know,
Yep.
We prescribe a lot of things in sort of this narrow concept of like, oh, that's going to protect property values. You know, property values they're very well protected in whitefish. Let me tell you.
Right.
There hasn't been a lot of property value decline in whitefish.
No matter what Larry O'Shaughnessy does to his properties, they are not going to decrease property values.
Totally, right? Because it's land.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the shack on top of it, even if it's fallen down. It's like people still want to buy it because land is valuable here. So kind of internalizing that helps with that aspect as well. I think, okay, so if we're talking about weirdness and creativity, you need a place where people can have a real community, where they can get off work and stay in the same place they are. I have a series on Instagram called Everything is Zoning. And when I say that like so many issues come back to housing, I'm even talking about things like political polarization in America. There's a great book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, and it's about how third spaces are kind of dying all across the United States. So a third space is a place that's not home, which is like the first space, and work or school, which is the second space. A third space is a place where you come in and just hang out, right? What are examples in whitefish? It's like it's wild coffee. For me, it's the climbing gym. It's rockfish, right? Maybe like a fraternal organization like the Elks Club. The
Wave.
The Wave is a great example. And I'll also throw out like churches, right? It's a great third space.
Totally.
The amount of time that people spend in spaces other than home and work or school in third spaces has really declined since the 90s. There's a lot of examples. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think like phones are a big component of it as well. But it's also because we've kind of zoned them to be hard to get to not be places you can pop in, but you have to make a trip. You know, you have to decide to go there. One of the reasons I love downtown Whitefish is it's just great for third spaces. There's third spaces all over it. And I love running into people that I don't know or that I haven't seen in a while and saying hi. And that's what keeps a community strong. That's what keeps people with different political ideas talking, as opposed to, yelling at each other over the internet. So stuff like that, I see as like a massive component of that is housing. It is zoning policy. The connection feels a little far-fetched, but then you think about how you relate to people in person versus online, and it can lead to like just a much better political conversation as well. Yeah.
So do we want to encourage like mixed use, like commercial residential? Is that something that's good?
Yeah. I'll steel man the argument for zoning.
Sure. Love that.
If I'm giving you the best take of what they're saying is we don't want a coal plant next to the elementary school.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the basic idea about like segregating uses is there's some undesirable things that you don't want downtown. It turns out that most of that can happen through like city ordinance and doesn't need to happen through a zoning code. I also think in a place like Whitefish that has an economy based on tourism and healthcare, right? If I'm thinking of the whole Flathead Valley, if you get rid of zoning, you will not get a coal plant in Whitefish, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like CFAC closed 20, 30 years ago. So I don't think it necessarily has as universal implications for stuff like that than you would think. So a lot of that can be controlled through other legal arrangements that don't have so many side effects. So if any of these developments want to get approved, they can request variances in zoning that allow them to build stuff that isn't approved.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the fundamental inequity is that everywhere the most unaffordable and land-intensive types of housing don't need to go through any review process.
Okay.
And then if you want to do anything that is unique, anything that is out of the ordinary, anything that isn't cookie cutter, and also anything that is more affordable, then you do need to go through that process. And so that's like the background. Zoning doesn't mean you can't do it by any reason, but it means that you're going to be subject to a lot of people yelling at you. And so we have projects that have gotten denied, and then we have a lot of other projects that, like, if you talk to developers around the Flathead Valley, they'll say, I don't want to develop in Whitefish. It's so inhospitable to creating any sort of new housing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, a certain amount of people listening are like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
We hate the developers, right?
Which is ironic because they're the ones that build the housing that we need.
And I think like, you know, we hear a lot of rhetoric about particular developers like greedy or bad or stuff like that. And it's like, I don't really want to litigate who's good and who's bad.
Totally.
I want a scenario where the most greedy, money hungry, you know, Montana hating, California, whatever, gun toting person comes to Whitefish and builds something that ends up being affordable despite him or her having like no altruism in their heart. If your solution to like a big policy problem is that people should just like be less greedy, like I agree, people should be less greedy. And also you're not going to solve the policy problem. Like you can't control everyone's preferences. You have to deal with this stuff in like your regulatory scheme and how you're shaping people's individual preferences.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point.
It's like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if developers are greedy. I want them to be greedy and then create socially beneficial projects out of that.
It's like a tropic cascade effect in a way.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways it is like it's like Adam Smith. It's like the history of like the free market, which is basically you can have a bunch of people that are selfish and create some socially beneficial things. Now, obviously there are like massive problems with a perfectly laissez-faire free market. But you want to encourage the good aspects of that before you start adding a lot of restrictions. Right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So let's talk then about Central Avenue and some ideas around, I guess, where did the idea come from to play around with permanently turning Central into a pedestrian-only avenue?
I'll start like sort of at a 10,000 foot view, and then we'll get more detailed.
Sweet.
So Central Avenue is probably the most valuable resource that the city of Whitefish completely controls. So obviously like the mountain and the surrounding nature is our most valuable resource, but Whitefish has complete control over the space of Central Avenue. They own that right away, right? And I think it's worth asking the question of whether we think like a pretty low throughput street and a decent amount of street parking is the best use of our most valuable resource. So pedestrianizing a downtown boulevard is not something that is novel, especially for a mountain town like Whitefish that relies on tourism. So like Banff has done this, Waterton does it sometimes during the summer. Helena has a pedestrian walking mall with businesses on either side. Boise, Boulder, as well as Burlington. A lot of other places have done it. It's obviously very common in Europe as well. And the theory behind this is basically that when you have a street where there's already way more foot traffic than car traffic, then those pedestrians are incentivized to spend more time in that area, and the community gets a lot nicer space when we don't give 80 to 90% of it to cars. So Central Avenue, those businesses, people spend time there, not because they're incredibly convenient, because you can drive right up in front of Fleur and then drive right away 5 minutes later, but because they're great community spaces. You know, a fun part about my job right now is I'm able to go get coffee with a bunch of different legislators and other people in the valley, and I'm always going to go to downtown Whitefish. I'm not going to go to a coffee hut out north of the town, but I would if I was driving to Kalispell. So I say all that to illustrate that there's differences between businesses that generate revenue based on convenience and businesses that generate revenue based on kind of ambiance or people wanting to spend time there. It's also a force multiplier. You know, Fleur does better because the Toggery is nearby. The Toggery does better because the bike shop is there. The bike shop does better because there's a lot of dispensaries downtown, whatever.
Art galleries.
Art galleries, yeah. There's a lot of art galleries.
Which is great to see that we have a community that supports the arts so much.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? We got Oshag. We got all sorts of great downtown art scene. So all of that, they all support each other. And they all rely on people wanting to spend a decent amount of time in Central Avenue whether that's tourism or whether that's locals. I think right now you go to downtown Whitefish, it's going to be a lot of locals, and they love Central Ave as well. So with all that being said, giving those businesses more space out on the street, giving pedestrians a lot safer place to spend time, giving the community space where other sorts of creativity can flourish, whether that's street musicians, that sort of stuff can develop.
Totally.
And also, I've been to a lot of these other places that have pedestrian malls, and every time I'm there, I'm like, why can't we do this in Whitefish? Mm-hmm. And so at some point I said, you know what? I'm going to try to do this in Whitefish.
Sure.
And that's where sort of our reels have come from. There's some people on the youth council at Whitefish High School that are also talking about this idea, as well as a city council person that's currently floating the idea for a pilot program next spring. That would involve closing one block for a few days a week.
That's good, just to test the waters. So if I understand it, you would just maybe take like the block on the brewery, for example.
Totally.
Close it for the weekend.
Yeah.
And just let people just maybe put some...
Survey. Ask the businesses, ask residents, ask them what they think, see what the parking situation is like.
What could you put out there? Like what would... Because if you're doing something temporary, maybe just like some tents, maybe some fire pits.
Yeah, temporary, there's less things you can do. It kind of looks like the Winter Carnival, basically.
Sure.
Once it's permanent, then you can have better infrastructure. I think of like businesses putting tables out there. Mm-hmm. In the summer, it's just tables. In the winter, it's heated tents like they did during COVID. Mm-hmm. A theme that keeps on coming up is creativity. We saw a lot of creativity in how our cities worked and how our businesses worked during COVID, right? We were faced with a crisis and businesses adapted. They said, we can't be indoors. We'll do these tents or bubbles or heated bubbles or whatever. I want our city to kind of adopt some of that creativity without being in a crisis. Like, let's be creative all the time. Let's think about some of these other ideas. So, also, when it's permanent, you can put in like better infrastructure. You're not just bringing in concrete to block the street. You're putting in bollards that go up and down.
Yeah, totally.
Allow, emergency trucks to come through, and then they can like go back up so that it's blocked from any private traffic. So obviously, this is not going to happen tomorrow.
Sure.
It's not going to happen permanently tomorrow, and it's not going to happen on all of Central Avenue tomorrow. But I think piloting it on certain blocks, even just doing traffic one way and taking out half the parking is an idea. Mm-hmm. Or just going kind of from north, from Depot Park south, where, there's already the parking structure right there, and there's so much infrastructure as well on that block. I think those are really good ideas. And I have a strong belief that the community will see a lot of benefits, and business owners will see revenue increases. This isn't just my idea. This is based on so many other cities that have started with a pilot program, seen a lot of success. The businesses have seen increased revenue. The community loves it, and then they make it somewhere more permanent. Yeah.
What are some of the arguments against it? Because I've heard a lot of people shake their heads when they hear this kind of idea.
Yeah, 99.9% of it is parking.
Parking,
right?
So you said, how many parking spaces? I know there's 40. You said there's 44. Is that per each block, or what is that 44 spaces?
Yeah, so it's like 22 on each side, on each block.
Okay.
There's only a few blocks that have a full 44.
Yeah.
Like the block by the bike shop has less, and then I think the one by Depot has a bit less.
Okay.
In
so it's
total,
actually like...
in total, it's like 150 spaces for the 4 kind of core blocks of Central Ave. And then, so if you did do all 4 blocks, you would basically keep the cross streets open. Mm-hmm. So you could still go east-west on there, and then you could still go north-south on either side. But it would just be like on the block itself.
Yep.
So 99.9% of the opposition is parking. The first thing I'll say is that the city of Whitefish does studies where every quarter they go out and they... both on a weekend and a weekday at different times of day, they record how full each parking lot is. Even the middle of summer, weekend, evening, parking is not completely full in Whitefish.
Wow.
Like, that's the perception, because like people are going to drive around and around until they can find a spot right in front of where they want to go to.
Totally.
Right?
Everyone is guilty of that.
Yeah, I've done it too. It's like, oh, come on. Which is just like, it's a perception thing. Like, it's car brain. Like, we have like evolved as Americans to consider The livability of a place is how much parking there is and nothing else.
Yep.
In the same way that like people say, oh, how environmental a place is, how much green like monoculture lawn do we have? Which like doesn't actually comply with reality that well.
Right.
But okay, people want to park. First of all, like the parking structure where we were just at, like it's almost never full. Mm-hmm. I also think it's worth exploring building more parking structures. The city owns those parking lots, they're valuable space, and a surface parking lot is not a very efficient way to utilize it.
Are you talking about the one by the library?
Yeah, the one by the library, the one like right across from the middle school.
Yep.
We've got, we got some asphalt in town.
How much does it cost though? That's can't be cheap to build a parking structure.
No, for sure. I think the first point is that you don't think we're going to build it in 20 years, right?
That's a good point. We probably will.
This is where I just like, we think so reactively. We wait for things to become a crisis and then we start to address them.
Right.
Like we waited until parking was really bad until we built the first parking garage. We're going to do the same thing again and again. It's like, I would love it if we could, for once, like think ahead and maybe like build capacity before we need it. Mm-hmm. The second thing is like, yes, it would cost money. I think in most of my dealings with the city of Whitefish, the problems, like the real constraints that we have, there are physical constraints of like money and resources, but much before we run into those, we run into constraints of political will, right? There's just a very pervasive element across like both the city and sort of like some of the nonprofits that have a lot of power that are basically like, don't rock the boat, and that's limiting things a lot more than money.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think like if this became a more permanent program, like closing Central Avenue is cheap, but if we want to build another parking structure, like, yeah, that's a question for like a bond issue or for how we redistribute resort tax revenue. Like, right. I think in the long term, this would be a financially lucrative opportunity that would be positive sum.
Sure.
And could like fund a parking structure, for example, which again, I think we're going to need anyway. But yeah, I mean, that's where people getting involved and going to like city budget meetings and stuff like that can be really useful. Now, again, that is not interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Like I get it. I totally get it. This entire conversation, it's like, this is fascinating to me. And I just want to give an apology to all the people I've been on climbs with, and they've been a captive audience for 10 hours and they've heard me talk about zoning for 10 hours.
Yep.
I've traumatized a lot of people. It matters. Like it's so fun to be able to drive around a city and have a completely different perspective on it. Like you can drive around Whitefish and just think about zoning or walk around Whitefish and just think about zoning, and it'll be a completely different experience than you've ever had in your life, right?
Right.
I love gathering all these different lenses to look at the world, like you get really into geology and then you drive somewhere and you're only thinking about geology, and that can take up a lot of space. Zoning is one of those too. It's another lens to look at the world through and like ask questions and just be curious.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating idea of shutting down Central for that. I guess the other thing you would probably need to take into consideration is like, okay, if you're limiting cars, also how do you get people there without driving? Like, yeah, because that's another thing we have a problem with is public transportation. Yeah. Is there any updates on that? Like what's in the works on that way? Because I know that's also, I was looking into it a little bit, like the pedestrian streets that are most accessible also have really good public transportation around them.
Absolutely. So it's all connected.
Yeah.
You cannot have a discussion about public transportation if you don't talk about land use and housing density. So you can look up a table, really fascinating, where it puts like bus, which is kind of the lowest cost way to do public transportation, light rail, heavy rail, whatever. And when does it become viable financially? When will people actually ride it? And the thing that determines that is the density of number of people around those transit stops. Like so LA, for example, you lived in LA for quite a while. They have a very well-funded and well-built metro system that has incredibly low ridership. Because you take a metro stop out to the suburbs, you stop there's a parking lot and there's a bunch of single family homes, and you kind of need a car to get around.
Right.
So what's the purpose of public transportation if it takes you between two places where you need a car to get anywhere?
Right.
So if you want to have a robust public transportation network, then you need to have mixed use and dense places close to those stops, whether bus or otherwise, that allow you to go from there walking or biking or like using other forms of transportation. Like if you're stranded someplace in the Flathead Valley without a car, if it drops you off without a car, then like the usefulness is very low. So you can't talk about those public transportation issues without bringing in everything else we're talking about in terms of density and mixed use zoning. As far as in Whitefish, the nice thing is Central Avenue is in a core with a lot of residential directly surrounding it within walking and biking distance. Even across the viaduct is absolutely within biking distance, right? And so if we allow more people who work there to live close, then that reduces the amount of car traffic trips that are going into the downtown core. I also think we have a lot of potential with the snow bus.
Oh, totally.
We already have some sort of public transportation network in Whitefish. I think that can be expanded. When it comes to between the cities, that's going to be a lot harder pull. The county commissioners are not worried about public transportation. It is not a priority for them at all.
Yeah.
And so it leads to the cities having to try to take the lead on a lot of that, and it just hasn't been very successful. I think even if you had a lot of money for a public transportation network in the valley and you didn't pair it with some of these land use changes, then I don't think it would be very successful.
Man, if you had a bus that was like going to Target, though,
Yeah.
I bet people would jump on that if they were like, it'll drop you off in front of the box stores.
Yeah, now we're getting into like stuff that, again, is more like a 50-year time frame for the Flathead.
Sure.
But when you do public transportation, like it has to be convenient, it has to be frequent.
Right.
It has to be safe. And all of those things are possible because there are many, many, many countries where that's the primary way of getting around, even in smaller mountain towns, even in valleys like the Flathead Valley.
Yeah.
But I think that's like a longer term goal.
And it's hard too because, Montana has such a driving culture because it's so big. And we also obviously have a drinking and driving problem.
Ugh.
Because we don't have public transportation.
Totally. Yeah. There's a stat, I think from the Sheriff's Department, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of people on the roads after dark in the Flathead Valley are drunk.
Oh.
Which, like, just be careful driving because that's an
1
insane
out of 4
stat.
or 5?
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I've heard that from a bunch of different people.
Yeah.
I'll have to go find the source.
I mean, I kind of believe it.
Yeah. And again, like, we're building, our zoning builds bars in the middle of a highway with a parking lot. Like, what do we think is happening?
Yeah. Right.
Right. You think
Totally.
everyone leaving at 1 a.m. has had like 1 beer and is below the legal limit. It's like, no, we're doing this. So here's the other thing.
So most people have for breakfast.
Yeah. Here's the other thing with housing. So you talk about car culture and stuff like that. I think about this all the time. I'm like, is there actually anybody who wants this? Right. There are maybe 60% of people in the Flathead who want to have a single family home. They want to have like 5 acres of land. They want to have 4 cars. They want to have a lifted pickup truck, whatever. And that's fine. Like, there is no regulatory scheme that I support that would eliminate that. The problem is our government assumes that that is what 90% of people want. And they mandate that that's what 90% of people get. So it's not that we're trying to limit the ability of those like 60% of people to live how they want. Like, we live in a free country. We have a libertarian ethic here, and I have no problem with that. It's that we force that style of life onto many, many more people who would probably like prefer other things. Think about me. Like, I'm young. I don't have any kids. I want to spend all my time outside, running and skiing and climbing and going to the park and stuff like that. And I do not care if my house is small and like if I have a space for a 2-car garage. It's like, I'm not going to use it. But that's a lot of what we build. And I think that kind of generational component really animates me as well. I just saw a study, it just came out a few days ago, that the average age of a first-time home buyer in the United States went from like 30 in the 1990 to kind of 2010 standard. And over the past 15 years, it's risen to 42.
Oof.
That is an incredibly challenging environment to grow up in. I think about what that means for my retirement, like my long-term future, when building wealth happens 12 years later than it used to.
Oof,
These are
so
really,
tough.
really big shifts. I think it creates a lot of political division. It creates a lot of anger from people like me who see the kind of generational responsibility of others to kind of leave the world better than they found it as not being fulfilled. And so a massive part of that is the cost of living crisis. You know, it's sclerotic institutions, it's a warming climate, it's all of these things that I think contribute to a sense of urgency among people like me to see really rapid change to that underlying affordability crisis. And so in the Flathead, I want it to be a parochial place where people can move back and build community. And that is just necessitates that we think differently about how the housing system works.
Let's wrap up with what's on the horizon that people need to be aware of as far as meetings, timelines, participation.
Absolutely. Well, the goal is that you can follow Shelter WF and stay appraised of any sort of these events that are happening in Whitefish. I also know in the Flathead Valley, people are all over the valley at all times. So the growth policy process is also happening in Sioux Falls and Kalispell. We have an associated nonprofit, Livable Flathead, where you can find updates for those cities. As far as Whitefish, we have a land use visioning session coming up in 2 weeks, I think Tuesday, the 17th or something like that. And there'll be more sessions coming up over the next few months. But again, one thing that I love is just sitting down and talking with people about housing and about any of these issues. So if anyone's made it this far, they agree with us. If they don't agree with us, shoot me an email. I'd love to sit down and get a coffee and talk more about like your perspective on it. So there's going to be a lot of chances to get involved until May when the final growth policy is adopted. And I think especially if you're someone who is affected by these housing issues, your voice probably isn't being heard enough. So going to some of these meetings, writing a letter beforehand, or even calling in on Zoom, people really do listen to that. People are going to respond to the feedback they get and from the people that show up. And structurally, it's hard for people like me to have a voice. And that's a challenge. And it's also what animates me every day. So if you want to get involved, follow Shelter WF on our social media, go to our website and join our email list. And stay interested.
Go to city council meetings.
Go to city council meeting. Honestly, okay, can I say one final thing?
Absolutely.
City council meetings are fun.
Right.
There is always someone there saying some wild stuff.
Yeah.
Like I laugh almost every city council meeting I go to.
Yeah.
So if there's one that you're going to already because it's an important thing and we've pinged you and we've made some reels and we're saying this is worth going to, like you go there, like you'll have a good time. There's some characters that show up to city council meetings. It's Parks and Rec. Like it literally is Parks and Rec. That show is a documentary of local government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can't go to it, watch it on YouTube. I watch it on YouTube all the time, and it's wildly entertaining.
Totally. Or you can just send in a letter beforehand. It's so easy.
Yeah. Cool. Keegan, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was fun cruising around Whitefish and stuff and just looking at the town through the lens of zoning. So if you're out there, just take a minute. Look at the trees, look at this beautiful fall, and think about it through the lens of zoning.
Yeah.
So, awesome.